Welcome everyone to another Canada Life public webinar. And our topic today is thriving in the life you didn't expect. If you'd like to listen to French audio for today's session, you can access French interpretation by clicking on the Listen in French button, which you'll see lower on your screen. Before we begin today's topic, I'd like to acknowledge that while we are joined by people from all across Canada, we're hosting this event from Toronto, which is situated on the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Bianna Snabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat Nations. We acknowledge the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a treaty whose spirit is one based in collective stewardship and sharing of land and resources, and one which extends to all nations living in present-day Toronto. Canada Life acknowledges the harms of the past, and we respect the history, people, and land in the areas we live and operate. We are committed to building relationships and moving forward in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, guided by shared principles of respect, equality, and collaboration. If you'd like to ask questions, you can. Depending on what sort of device you've joined us on, you can either submit questions directly on the screen. The box will appear at the side of your screen or underneath, and you can go to slido.com and enter hashtag CLWebinar in the field that says hashtag enter code here. This code can be found at the bottom of each of our slides, and we have a team of moderators who will review and publish the questions as they come in. So keep an eye on Slido. I'm sorry, it's the hashtag, I misspoke. It was hashtag CL Wellbeing, not webinar, CL Wellbeing. And keep an eye on Slido. If you see a question that someone has asked and you'd like to give it a thumbs up, you can vote for it, and that will escalate the question in our view. And we'll ask questions. We'll do our best to answer those throughout, and then we'll have some time at the end of the session as well, hopefully, to take up the remainder of the questions. As always, we're joined by Marianne Baton, Director of Collaboration and Strategy, Workplace Strategies for Mental Health, as well as members of the Canada Life Wellbeing team from across Canada. I'm Laura, and I'm joined by Laurel, Ida, Samia, and Kim. We have also compiled a list of resources that we are likely going to refer to today. And if you'd like to see those resources, you can click on the resources link at the bottom of your screen. So now over to Laurel, who's going to provide us with more details about our topic.
Thanks, Laura. The Canadian Mental Health Association has declared this week, the first week of May, to be Mental Health Week in Canada. Their theme this year is My Story. They explain that collectively and individually, we all have multiple layers and stories that make us who we are. In our past webinars, we've received a lot of questions about coping with life in all its forms. Many of the questions have been around challenges dealing with and accepting change. Change that we didn't want, nor that we wanted or thought to expect. So today we're going to be talking with Marianne about some of the most common situations mentioned and how we can cope better by anticipating, accepting, and adapting to change. Now, change is one of those things we can count on in life because it's constant at work, at home, and in our communities. Change, although sometimes great and exciting, can also be a source of stress. I'm sure we can all list lots of life's biggest stressors: passing of a loved one, divorce, moving, job loss, a personal injury. Okay, we get the picture, I'll move on. But when it does come to change, even small changes can mess with our feelings of being in control or feeling comfortable in our life. Sometimes even when we choose the change, it can cause unwanted stress, like making a choice between the path that we're on and a new exciting opportunity. But quite often it feels like change in our life is outside of our control. However, imagine, if you will, how boring life would be if there was no change. Everything progressing as anticipated, nothing unexpected ever happened. So today we're going to be chatting about whether it's possible to thrive while dealing with change. We'll be touching on how to embrace change, even when it places us in a circumstance or a life we didn't expect. Facing multiple changes all at the same time can be overwhelming, and having us ask ourselves, what's next. Our overall well-being can suffer, relationships become strained, and our ability to cope, even with the simplest things, can diminish. As we talk about unexpected life-changing events at home and at work, we'll explore how we can reframe how we look at change and develop skills we need to thrive through change and, in fact, grow from it. As said earlier, we are all different and we have our own stories. Although we may share similar life events, it's our own individual circumstances that make the changes we face unique to us. It's true, some changes are harder than others, and coping with change may come easier to some. But if we learn to apply the 5 A's, anticipate, adapt, accept, alter, and avoid, we will get to a place where we may be able to manage and look at change in a different way. Ida, over to you.
Well, the rate of change has been accelerating over the past 70 years, and there's every indication that this trend will continue. It certainly did over the last 3 years. And we may think that we have life planned out, but rarely does life progress according to the plan. Changes that we experience, they can come on suddenly and unexpected, like the death of a loved one or being laid off from a job that we happen to love. Or they may come on a little less sudden, maybe slowly over time. We begin to recognize that a long-standing relationship just isn't working anymore. In either case, it may leave us questioning who we are and where we're going. So the first A in the 5 A's is anticipate. So by definition, this means to expect and prepare for constant change. I think it's really telling me that even if I can't expect what a specific change is going to be, I can anticipate and expect that things are going to change. And there are some things I know that will change, like technology that we use at work. And by anticipating that change, it's less likely to really sort of stress me out. But when change is unexpected and that change occurs, and if I feel like I'm struggling to cope, there's something that can help, or one of the things that can help is to really I take a few minutes and really take stock of what hasn't changed around me. What has been reliable, what has been constant. So, for example, if I was going through a relationship breakdown or a significant job change, who are my constant sources of support? They are my friends, my family, coworkers. So by focusing on those reliable constants, I can put the source of change into perspective and it will be more manageable. Marianne, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, my thoughts, Ida, are grounded in the research that we looked at around post-traumatic stress disorder, around burnout. And what we found is there's this common denominator that if you feel blindsided by something, if you feel that it caught you off guard, you are much more likely to be emotionally traumatized by it than when it's something you expect. So that anticipate can be the difference between you being able to deal with it and move forward or having longer term impact. Some examples of that are one of the soldiers that I was working with said that those who went into the theater of war anticipating that they were going to be heroes were much more likely to be traumatized than those who went into the theater of war knowing they had to do things that they would never do in civilian life, things that were difficult for them. But we can look at that across almost every profession. Those who go into nursing thinking they're just caring for people who are appreciative of it are going to be blindsided. Teachers who think that the children are all going to love them are going to be blindsided. People that are answering phones who think they're just solving people's problems and that people will be appreciative or going to be blindsided. So part of this whole idea of anticipating really plays into the workplace in that we need to help people anticipate the good and the challenges that are in a job. But in our personal lives, we need to think about in the course of our lives, what are the things that normally happen to people? They have loss, they have disappointment, they have frustration, they have relationship breakups, they have health problems, their own and their loved ones. And when we can get to a place where we understand these things are going to happen, when we anticipate they're going to happen, they will have a much less significant long-term negative impact.
Thanks, Marianne. Now, the next A is accept. Now, this means, accept the changes that we can't control. I think about the numerous times at work where a new process or technology has been rolled out. And, my reaction is often to procrastinate until I absolutely have to figure it out. And then once I complete the training and put the new process into place, I realize how much time I have spent just thinking about it and actively putting off that training. And then when I finally did it, I realized how easy and quick it was. So in essence, I let it take up a lot of unnecessary space in my brain. So I do try and remind myself about that and motivate myself not to procrastinate over and over again or avoid wasting that brain space. And many workplace changes are outside of our control, whether that be new leadership, a reorganization, as well as new tools and processes that are pushed out. When we think about it, it doesn't really make sense to resist a change that's not within our control, but sometimes resistance happens anyways. It's often, I think, a result of fear. So in the workplace, it may mean that we're fearful that we won't be successful in the new workplace environment. We'll be uncomfortable, or we'll have extra work that we can't cope with. But we can move away from that fear and towards acceptance by recognizing why we are resistant and focusing on the things that we can control. So if new procedures or technology is being rolled out, we can look at taking some additional training so that we get comfortable with it. Marianne, I want to ask you again in terms of what are your thoughts with regards to accepting those things we can't control?
Well, I don't think any of us, Ida, want to be passive pushovers. Just, yeah, go ahead. Whatever you want to dump on me, I'll accept it. I'll take it all. I think when we talk about accept, it's really that idea of it is what it is. Wishing it weren't so isn't going to change it. Wishing something didn't happen or wouldn't happen isn't necessarily going to change it. So acceptance is really about looking at it objectively and understanding that you have to deal with what is now. And one of the situations I was in was that my mom was given a terminal diagnosis. And I, of course, resisted that terminal diagnosis, taking her to different specialists, different doctors, looking things up on the web, frantically bringing her to be poked and prodded and tested because I wanted to find a different answer. I wanted to find a cure. I wanted to find a way to prolong her life. When I finally accepted, and I don't think I should have from the get-go. I think I should have done some of that work, but when I finally accepted that it was what it was, I was able to change from bringing her to be poked and prodded and pushed around to saying, okay, no more of that. Now we're just going to make sure that every day you feel loved, you feel valued, and that you get a chance to laugh. And it changed everything for her. It changed everything for us. And that's really what the accept is. And, we talk about relationships. And if a relationship is breaking down, it is what it is. So, sure, you want to see, can you fix it? You want to see, can you maybe go for counseling? Can you talk it out? But when you come to the understanding, it is what it is, then you decide, do you want to stay there? Is it worth it? Or do you want to go? But one thing that I think is really important is that with all of these A's, you need to look at both the pros and the cons. So you're thinking objectively, you're thinking rationally rather than emotionally about it. If I accept that this is the way it is, what are the pros of that? What are the cons of that? And then you're able to objectively make a decision for yourself.
Marianne, we have a couple of questions I thought might be a good time to get started on those because they kind of relate a little bit to what Ida was talking about a few minutes ago. The top question that's gotten the most votes so far is, how do you deal with feelings of burnout when there's no end in sight? Employers continuing to add new tasks to employees who are already at their max. And then the second question is similar. How do you stay resilient when you're getting more and more of those tasks added to your day, I guess? Any
Yeah.
thoughts about that at this point?
So this is going to be a very practical answer because I'm a very practical person. But part of the reason that we get burned out, stressed out, are the thoughts that we're having about the work, the fears that we're having about being judged or being fired or not living up to some standard, usually our own. And what we need to change isn't the amount of work necessarily. We have to change the way we think about it. And there's three things that I do. Because as most of you know, I already did burnout. So I slow everything down, the way I think, the way I talk, the way I move, the way I work, because my mind at that time is going 200 miles an hour and it's not helpful. I also focus on only one thing at a time in order that I don't make a mistake, I don't miss something, and that my focus isn't distracted. And the other thing that I do is I get help with priorities because when I'm burning out or stressed out or overwhelmed, I think everything is urgent and important and critical. And so I understand that that's my mindset. Those are the thoughts that I'm having. That is not necessarily the reality. So I will write down what I need to do. I will write down what I think is the estimated amount of time it will take. And if I am an employee, I will bring that to my boss and say, please help me to prioritize. I work 40 hours a week. This looks like it's 60. What would you like me to do or not do? Or is there something in here that maybe I'm taking too long to do? Or maybe something that you didn't know I was doing or that takes longer than you thought? So it's a very practical way. Just stop, slow it down, and get very practical with prioritizing.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Marianne. Over to Samia.
Thank you, Ida. I was once listening to our great Canadian athlete, Haley Wickenheiser, speak, and she was talking about the importance of adapting to change, and she used the phrase, bloom where you're planted. And that sentence really stuck with me. I know she's not the first to use this expression, and I tried to find the origin of it and of the quote, but it was goes as far as referencing to the Bible. So I got to more focus on what it actually means. And for me, bloom where you're planted means to find and take advantage of opportunity for growth despite the circumstance. So, in the context of change, it means addressing any fear or concern while keeping our focus on making the best of any situation and to find ways to thrive through it. She also mentioned and has done a lot of public speaking. She's now a physician, but she's also a very successful, as you know, Canadian hockey player, and she's also a mother. She draws parallel between what made her successful on the ice to broader life skills and career success. We can find a lot of extract of her videos on YouTube, and she talks a lot about how to balance it all. And in a particular one of her videos, she mentioned being able to adapt in life is very important, especially as an athlete. If you don't adapt, you're left behind. You have to be constantly open to feedback in order to have a successful career. And that's what the next A, adapt, means. As we keep our focus on making the best of a situation, we can ask ourselves, is there anything good that might come of this? Are there career or learning opportunities? Could there be improvement to our current situation? Does it open up the possibility of new goals or priorities? I recently read about the concept of the stay interview. We all heard of the exit interview, where we're asked why the individual is leaving the company and what could we have done differently to keep them. The concept of stay interview is to actually obtain feedback and review skill set, ability, and strength to promote the employee engagement in the organization. We know that change is happening around us as we focus on adapting. We might want to check in more frequently with our leaders, make sure that we have the information we need to be successful, seek clarity, and ask for feedback to have the opportunity to reset our goals and objectives. Marianne, what's your thought about the stay interview that I mentioned?
Well, to me, it's almost one of those things where you go, well, duh. Like you need to, if you look at the National Standard of Canada on Psychological Health and Safety, one of their principles, one of the main points they make is that you must have meaningful participation of employees. What does that mean? That means you need to speak to them. You need to understand how they're feeling about the workplace. And that's what a stay interview is. It would be asking, Samia, what's good about this place? Why are you still here? And what would you like to be changed for this to become the ideal workplace for you? And what are you willing to do to help create that vision? These kinds of discussions with employees give so much more actionable feedback than why are you leaving? Because why are you leaving is too little too late. And also, people don't want to burn their bridges, so they may not be honest to begin with in an
Mhm.
exit interview. Whereas in a stay interview, there's a reason, there's something in it for them to be able to state it, not in a negative way, but in a way that is positive. When we talk about adapt from the 4As from an individual perspective, what we're really talking about is, can you change the way you think about this situation? Can you change the way that you interact with it, you react to it, or the way you act on it? And so it becomes a very personal thing to think about how I could change things. And, changing your mind about a situation can change your experience of it.
And Marianne, the next question relates to the topic of adapt, I think, really well. The question is, I feel like the world has changed around me and my previous plans and decisions now don't fit. So I'm struggling with regret, uncertainty, and anxiety.
Oh, so let me say, the world has changed around you. There is no question. It has changed for all of us, which is really interesting because I don't know when in history the entire globe went through a life-altering event, but it made some of us think, hey, I now know what is important to me, and that's what I'm going to focus on. It made some people feel the world is not safe and I don't feel safe in it. All of these reactions are normal reactions to what has happened. Well, you layer other things, life stressors, on top of a pandemic, and you can see why people are unsettled. But whenever I feel unsettled, uncomfortable, uncertain about life, I now see it as a call to stop and reflect. Here's the way I look at it, and you can take this for however you want to take it. But I think that sometimes we get this tiny little nudge that something's not right. Then it's like a whisper in our ear, and then it gets a little louder, and then we feel a little jostled. At any one of these points, we can respond. We can say, okay, something needs to change. What is it? I'm open and I'm ready. And if we fail to, then we get knocked to our knees. And that's when we'll start to listen. And my advice is take the little nudges, take the little whispers, and pay attention. Something needs to change. I'm unsettled. What is that? How can I make it different than what it is? And how can I not resist what is, but alter the way that I respond to what is? Yeah.
Marianne, a little bit like you just said, right? The pandemic has represented for the first time all employees in our organization that are going through, the same thing at the same time, but also the fact that we're almost, 5 generations in certain workplace living together and working together, and now we're going through a period of change. Intergenerational group can lead to, of course, differences, but also potential conflict. And you mentioned previously that, leaders kind of have to look at ways to manage their workforce as if there were new teams, because everything is different and it's different in different ways for everyone, right? Everybody has different types of challenges, but are all working together. So we might need to try new things and to help people navigate to their change in a different way. And this, I think, it's referencing a lot the 4A, which is alter our situation and try to reduce or eliminate stress around changes as much as possible. And what can we do to do that? But I think, first of all, we could definitely consider whether a change in equipment, workplace, routine could definitely help us identify ways to reduce our distraction, conflicting demands during the time of change. So really, what can we do, small things to do to better support employees and better support each other as coworkers during these types of periods? And identifies in advance any type of resource and support that is needed through period of transition. So if we know that we're going to go through a period of transition in the next 3 months to 6 months related to, a change in technology or in change in leadership, I think it's important to prepare in advance our coworkers and our teams through providing resources and tools prior to any types of event. Another things that also we could consider is to have to advocate for team members to seek the help of a monitor or a mentor. So, for example, we could consider contacting someone who has been through the change in the past. It could be a colleague, could be a mentor, but even somebody from outside the organization that had already adapted to a similar type of change within their organization to provide how they went through the experience. It could also be helpful to find out what support may be available as part as the benefit plans that you have or through employee assistance program. Many of these have extended benefits that also offer different types of career counseling, coaching, and also support that can help navigate through different types of change that we're exposed to. Marianne, what's your thoughts on how can we better alter different types of situation in order to reduce the stress?
hmm So, on our website, we've got the work of Dr. Carlos Davidovich merged in with appreciative inquiry and around change. And some of the things that really strike me that we don't do well in general is to not go rah, 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 here's the change, but to say, this is the change. Here's the things that I think are going to be a challenge for you. So, in other words, as the leader, as the person who's discussing the change, I'm already recognizing that this could present a challenge, and we can talk about the solutions to those challenges rather than wait as your distress just gets bigger and bigger as you're thinking these things through. So be honest and open about it. The other thing that came out of that is that we often say, well, we have to do this change because we're not keeping up or it's necessary or whatever, but we never celebrate if this change is so great, then doesn't that mean that what we were doing before was so much harder and we should be celebrated for it? And some of that celebration gets lost, some of that recognition that you're doing the best you can and that we're going to go through this difficult period. So, from a work standpoint, I think change could be handled a whole lot better by engaging employees in the discussion about both the pros and the cons of the change, rather than just this is what we're doing and this is
Yeah.
why. The other thing, though, about alter for the 4As, when we talk about it from a personal perspective, alter is about changing things in your external environment, whereas adapt is your internal environment, right? Your thoughts. So the altering can be it can be anything from how you drive to work. If you're stressed going on the highway every day, find the back roads. You can alter. I'm sitting here in my first floor office, and my mother was upstairs when she was bedridden. And I would be working, and she would call me probably every 10 minutes, and I'd be running up and down the stairs, and I was just frazzled, like, wow. And I moved my office into her bedroom, and it was so much easier. I just altered the situation a little bit. And it just sometimes we just keep pushing through, resisting what is. What is that she needed me, and I changed the situation. So alter, just stop for a minute, look around, think how you could make your environment, think how you could make your routine a little less stressful for you.
Marianne, there was a question, it's been removed because I think Sammy had answered it for the most part, but it was around mentorship in the workplace. And it's kind of interesting in relation to the intergenerational workers. But the question was really around how important is finding that mentor. And I'm just curious if you have thoughts about the value of that when you're dealing with workplace change.
Yeah. There's a couple places where I believe a mentor can be critical. Anybody who is new to the organization or new to a role should be assigned a mentor. That is a critical transformative time, and to have that person having your back is critical. The rest of the time, I think we should all be mentors to everybody else. I think that we should teach people how to mentor. I've been so fortunate throughout my whole career that I've never had a formal mentor, somebody who signed up and said, I'm going to mentor you. But I have had dozens of people give me great advice, give me great feedback, help me when I needed it. And I now feel that I need to pay that forward and I need to help people. And so I do it. In a workplace, I think we need to help everybody see themselves as a mentor and help everybody see themselves as a potential mentee, that there's people that will have your back. Now, the question is, what's the best approach to find one? I would say just look at anybody who you think they've got it all together, because they'll tell you they don't. But the way they have it all together is what attracted you, and that's who should be your mentor. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, Marianne.
Thanks.
Okay, I think we're moving on to the last A, and it's an interesting concept. And the last A that we wanted to highlight is avoid. And that doesn't mean avoid change, as we've heard. It means when we're faced with significant change, we can help ourselves cope if we avoid or minimize other stressors. We know that not all stress can be avoided. For example, any financial or health issue can get much, much worse if you avoid dealing with them. Rather, what we should try to do is avoid things that may disrupt existing positive routines and self-care during times of change. We've all seen our friends and family and ourselves navigate these stressful situations with varying degrees of success. For me, the times when change or unexpected life events have felt the most manageable have been those times when I've been able to be consistent and maintain positive habits or actions. So, to cope effectively with change and whatever life brings forward, we really should do our best to do the following and avoid things that are barriers to our ability to maintaining our physical activity, whether it's daily walks, fitness classes, or just activities that help us get up and move regularly, or things that impact our ability to choose nutritious meals. And I know that's really difficult when we're going through times of significant change or stresses. And when we're working, it's really important that we try to minimize those things that impact our ability to maintain that healthy work-life balance, taking our breaks, eating our lunch, or, and trying to keep that overtime at a minimum, like Marianne said, to try to slow down and take things one at a time. We want to make sure we practice good sleep habits. And last, we want to make sure we can try to avoid self-medicating with alcohol or drugs when things are really stressful. And because if we do end up doing this, the self-medicating will be a deterrent to all the things I've just mentioned. And one thing I'd really like to add to this list when considering avoiding is the healthy use of social media. I think we can all agree this is a growing issue, and the level of impact it is having on people is something I would never, ever have imagined 5 years ago today. I hear from more and more people every day, if it's not from themselves personally, someone's family, friend, or colleague is being impacted by social media. Just look at the changed behaviors at people in restaurants or in public transit, the changed behaviors of your family members, children and teens, and even our coworkers' engagement in virtual meetings such as this. An organization called the Change Management Review describes our world as hyperactive and overstimulated. They make the point that if we're already feeling oversaturated and overstimulated, coping with change will be difficult. Those words really make me think of how social media has contributed to those feelings. According to helpguide.org, multiple studies have found a strong link between heavy social media use and increased risk of depression, anxiety, and loneliness. It may promote negative experiences such as feelings of inadequacy about your life or your appearance. Some studies have linked social media to poor physical health, sleep disruption, fatigue, and increased sedentary levels. When we're using social media, we're constantly seeing images of people traveling, improving their homes, buying things, and even more recently in the career space, which can really create a feeling of not keeping up. The constant bombardment of these thousands of colorful and fleeting images cannot be good for us, not to mention the time we could have been spending doing something to maintain our well-being. Sometimes seeing all these images and unrealistic expectations can lead one to avoid in a non-positive way, which can make coping with change more difficult. For example, not seeing or avoiding people for fear of feeling inadequate, thus perpetuating the loneliness or perpetuating those unhealthy and harmful behaviors such as substance misuse or poor work-life balance. So Marianne, I'm really hoping you can share with us some further comments on how avoiding supports our ability to cope with change, but also additionally, how do we help others avoid in a positive way so that they can manage change better? And then lastly, how can we help others who we know are avoiding in a negative way, which are a barrier to their ability to cope with change?
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, there's so much to this one, and it's funny because this is the one that gets the most resistance. Well,
Yeah.
avoiding's just being in denial, and you're not dealing with your stuff. But I've got a colleague who, when she travels, calls the hotel and says either empty or remove the minibar because she doesn't want the stress and temptation of drinking because she's a recovering alcoholic. So there she's avoiding something that makes everything else easier to deal with. I don't like to have chocolate in the house because it yells at me. It says, "Please eat me now, eat me now." So if it's not here, I don't hear it, and it's good. You can avoid certain people who drain your energy. It doesn't mean you're going to be rude. It doesn't mean you're going to walk out of the room when they walk in. It just means you're not going to engage. People say, well, I live with that person. Well, that's okay. You know the things, the arguments, you know how it escalates. And if you don't engage, it can reduce some of that stress for you. You can, I like social media, but I curate my social media so that there's only the things that lift me up that are on it. Anything else I don't follow or I don't friend or I hide or whatever. So you can curate it. I don't watch the news anymore because I found that it was just draining me. I read the news so that I stay up on what's going on, but it's a completely different impact than having all those horrible images in my mind. So avoiding can be a very positive approach, but like all the other A's, you need to know the pros and cons. Because if I say I'm just going to avoid my children because they stress me out, that's not a very good way to parent. And there are a lot of cons to doing that. But if you say, well, I'm going to avoid taking all my children shopping because they're all over the place and I'm stressed out, so I'll find somebody to stay with them while I go. So you avoid what helps you to manage better, but you don't avoid those things that are going to make it even worse for you. Oh, um, I always think about Tony Schwartz, who does energy management. And this sort of ties into this. And his study was that if you take a break, so you get up, you walk away from whatever you're doing, could be for 5 minutes, but if you take a break, at least every 90 minutes, your productivity goes way up. So what are we avoiding? We're avoiding pushing through. That's what we're going to avoid by taking these breaks and understanding that in the end we'll be more productive. So lots of things you can avoid as long as you know that ultimately that's going to be in your best interest.
Excellent. We have time for questions. We're at the end of we've covered our 5 A's, and now we're going to tackle the rest of the questions that we have in Slido. Sammy, I know you're looking for anything in French. Are there any French questions you wanted to ask at this point, or should we just go through the list?
I don't see any at this point, Laura.
All right. So the
I'm
next
wondering,
one,
Laura,
yeah.
sorry, I was just going to say, I wonder if we could weave two questions into one. It's interesting. We have two questions here, Marianne, that are being elevated up in the list. One is how not to bring work home with you at the end of the day. But then we also have another question, how do I not let my personal life impact my work performance? So I'm just wondering if you could perhaps give some practical, maybe draw on some of the A's on what some steps folks can take to address that.
Um, it was the late great Stephen Covey who said, "It's easy to say no when you have a bigger yes." And what that means to me is I prioritize my family over work. And when I think that taking on more work, and if you understand, I'm a consultant, it's all on me. I can't blame anybody else. But taking on more work and knowing that it's going to have a negative impact on them makes it easy. Now, every job that I've ever talked, and I've talked to thousands and thousands of people now, they all have times where you got to do a little extra, you got to work a little harder, you got to work a little longer. That's just normal. It's when this becomes the norm that you need to push back and say, again, here's all the things I have to do, here's the hours. What do you want me to do about it? But instead, our insecurity comes up and we think, well, I have to. I'm going to let people down. Everybody's counting on me. This is important work that I do. These things that we tell ourselves that make it such a stressful situation. Whereas most of the time, it's let's problem solve around this. I'll work really hard for 8 hours, but then I need to work really hard at being a good family member or a good friend or whatever. So that's the one thing about bringing work home. Occasionally, of course, we all have to. On a regular basis, something's wrong. And you're only going to burn out. So it's not going to do a favor to you or to your employer. So that's on that one. And then the other part, Laurel, I think you were asking. No, I don't know. What were you asking? What was the other part?
The
Kind
other
of the
part,
switch around.
personal.
Yeah, so how not to let what's happened in your personal life impact your work performance. So kind of that old saying, leave your personal issues at the doorstep of your workplace, which we know that isn't
No.
possible because we're a whole person and we come with the issues that may have happened to us the night before or that morning, in fact. So just wondering if you could touch on that.
So I think that I very much believe that we should be able to be ourselves at work without fear. But I also believe that we have to understand the impact that we're having on others. And so we've created something called the team agreement process, where you actually bring your unique team together to talk about how they want to interact, what they feel is the ideal work experience, and what sort of behaviors take them towards that, and what sorts of behaviors take them away from that. And what this means is that if I'm going through a bad time in my life, I don't have to hide it, but I'm very clear about how I can or should not let it impact others. So coming in hysterical and screaming is not going to be acceptable. That's not going to be a behavior that takes us towards the work environment. But coming in and saying, can I chat with you at break? I want you to know what I'm going through. Or to go to your boss and say, I just want you to understand what I'm dealing with. Yes, it will impact your work a bit. Your focus is going to be a little off. You're a little shook, but it's the important thing is it's not impacting the other people. You're not complaining every minute of every day. You're not making other people's lives more stressful. And the thing is, people say, well, what if you have depression? I know so many people who have depression that always put a smile on. They never have a negative impact on anybody, even when the repetitive negative thoughts of worthlessness and hopelessness are just so profound for them. So we can manage our behaviors, our personal impact on others. And if it slows down your work, but distractions are taken away so that you can just focus, it's actually a reprieve from whatever your personal stressors are. So your work can continue if you focus on the work while you're there.
We have the next, I'm going to skip over and come back to the next question because the question below kind of relates to what we're just talking about, which is how can we support our colleagues who express negative language or feelings about changes at work? It's hard to stay positive when people are negative. So I guess that would be the situation where somebody is coming to work, perhaps influenced by some other things going on.
Yeah, I would say to people who are negative about anything, I'll say, what would you do instead? What do you think would make this better? Given that we have to, whatever, have this new technology or we have to change locations or whatever it is, how would you have managed this? And get them focused on solutions rather than just what the problems are. Maybe they'd come up with a great solution, if they've been thinking about this. And if they don't feel confident bringing their solution forward, maybe you can and say, yeah, let's flesh this out. Let's really think about the pros and cons of this. And if you don't want to, I'll bring it forward. The thing is when you start to talk to somebody about solutions, one of two things is going to happen. Either they're not going to complain to you anymore because you're not playing the game right, or they're not going to complain to you anymore because they're going to be thinking about solutions. Either way, you win.
The next question, how do we address the new impacts that menopause has on our productivity, on our emotionality and our resilience? And the comment is, it's hardly the conversation that you want to have with your supervisor.
True. But first,
Mhm.
let's recognize that menopause is different for everybody,
Yeah.
right? And that what you need to do is really think about how is it impacting you? What is it? Is it that I knew one woman, her hot flashes, she looked like she had a bucket of water poured on her. It was just that intense.
Mhm.
And so she would constantly have to go and dry off and be able to come back. She had extra clothes at work. Some people it's other symptoms, but it's unique to you. So you figure out what it is that is impacting you, and then you need to figure out what kinds of things you can do. Now, if you look at supporting employee success, which is really a tool for accommodation. You can go through all the different job expectations, there's 18 of them, and just think, is this really impacting your ability maybe to focus, your ability to interact with people, your ability to meet deadlines, and then problem solve around that. There's suggestions in that tool around it. Menopause is a natural process. It will pass, could last for years. So just figure out how you can accept it is what it is. How can you adapt the way you're thinking about it? It's just part of life and you'll get through it. What can you do in the meantime? How can you alter your situation? Do you have
Yeah.
change clothes? Do you wear dry fit all the time? And, of course, looking at the medical and is there something medically that could be done? So just see it as a situation to be addressed like every other situation you've dealt with all throughout your life.
Sorry, there's questions are moving around. One caught my eye, but there's a question about being a team player. Please share how best to be a team player while you don't feel like a member of the team.
Great question. Um, we are creating, well, we've created the questions for psychologically safe teams, and it covers three things. It covers your sense of inclusion, which is what you're talking about. You don't even feel like a member of the team. Um, Team interactions. How supportive are people of each other? And leadership. Does leadership support cohesion or competition? And how does that impact the team? So this tool, you'll be able to assess how all the team members are feeling. It's confidential, anonymous. And then the leader gets a series of resources so that they can start to make changes. But let's turn it around too. You're not the leader and you don't have the ability to impact. So psychologically safe teams is not going to help. But when you don't feel like a member of the team, think about why. What in particular is making you feel that way? And don't say because people are whatever. Say, what are the specific, measurable, and observable behaviors or words or actions that are contributing to that? And what would you have to see, hear, experience to not feel that anymore? When you can get that concrete about what is impacting you, now you are able to affect change. And the way that you can do it is by asking for the things that would make it better. I know everybody is busy. And when we get together for a team meeting, we're just talking at a high level about what people need to do, and then we go. But I think there's some of us here that never get a chance to share or chime in. Could we start to change the meeting so that there is a bit of time for each person or whatever
Mhm.
it is? But just when you're complaining about something, people hear it one way. When you're asking for a solution, they hear it another way. Now, if it doesn't work, if they don't want to help you at all, if they don't want to include you, if they don't, then that's a different decision, right?
Mhm.
So that would be one of those things is maybe you're getting a nudge that this isn't your team, that this isn't where you belong. But try first. Try and see if it's just everybody is spinning in the circle of their own universe and they don't know how you feel. They're not aware of it, and
Yeah.
it's not their biggest concern. But often when we tell people what we need, they're happy to give it to us. They just would never have noticed.
And I think the next question is I think you've answered it. What are some strategies to talk to my manager about the things that I'm not happy about? You've identified several of those in that response, which was
Yeah.
great.
I just want to say that when you're talking to a manager, we know from our emotional intelligence surveys, our burnout surveys, our psych health and safety surveys, most managers are stressed to the max. And so when you come to them and say, I don't like this and I don't like that, they're just like, more stuff. But
Mhm.
when you come to them and say, I want to be a great employee, and this is what I believe that I need to do that. And I'm wondering if we can talk about whether any of these things are possible. So you come to it not from the complaining perspective, but you come from it from the perspective that you want to be the best employee you can be. And this is what would support you to do that.
The next question is about lack of training. So how do you deal with feeling overwhelmed and under prepped for a I guess for a workplace due to the lack of training provided?
Oh, I mean, the first thing I would do is say could I have the training? If they say no, I would put it in writing because now it becomes risk management, right? That I believe that I require this training in order to do this job effectively, and this is why. And then if they still don't, maybe there's no time, maybe there's no budget, they still don't. For me, I would go and find it online and do what I could do on my own. If I wanted to succeed and felt they weren't supporting my success that way, I mean, there's just nothing that we can't find anymore on our own. And so I would do what I need to do. Another way that you might be able to be more prepared is ask someone who is really good at the job. If you could shadow them, if you could interview them, if you could chat with them and get from them what they do and how they do it differently. But don't let anybody tell you that because they don't have a budget for training, you have to stay stuck. You don't. You can go find information for free everywhere. Yeah.
Marianne, maybe this will be our last question, given our time. And it's something that you've already touched on, but the question is, how do you anticipate but not be constantly anxious about possible change? So it's kind of replacing one A with another, which is how to in a healthy way, anticipate changes coming, which I think you've already done, but maybe if you could close us off with some of your wise words.
Well, wise words. I won't use the words that they would normally use, but stuff happens. We don't need to visualize all the terrible things that could happen in life. What we need to do is when they happen, to say, yes, these things happen. I knew that these things would happen. What can I learn from it? How can I grow from it? How can I make the best of it? My mother is dying. How can I make the best of this inevitably bad situation? Ah, I can love her right now. Or somebody's suddenly gone. How can I make the best of something that's so terrible? Well, I could do something in their honor. I could live in a way that respects and honors the spirit that they had. So even the very worst things in life, when we anticipate them and we don't resist them, especially when they've happened, then we can go forward. So the only thing to anticipate isn't to visualize every terrible thing that could happen, but to say, when it happens, I will do what I need to do to accept it, to move forward in a way that makes the best out of every day of the rest of my life.
Thank you so much, Marianne. We have 1 minute left, so we're going to close basically to let everybody know or to remind you that we do have links to a variety of the resources that we've referenced today at the bottom of your screen. You can take a look at those in English and French. Of course, as always, Workplace Strategies for Mental Health has a wealth of resources. Marianne, thank you so much for your wisdom today, as always. And we will be letting you know when our next public webinar is. We're anticipating in the fall, but we haven't got the details finalized yet. In the meantime, you can expect to see this a recorded version of this webinar on YouTube in a couple of days. And for those of you who perhaps haven't had the opportunity to join, maybe you can tell your friend who didn't join, you can still access the meeting through the link provided. So thank you, everybody, for your attention today.